and welcome to LA Currents. I'm Anita Bennett. There are many important issues affecting residents in Council District 14, and joining us to discuss some of these issues is the man who represents that area, City Councilman Kevin de León. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, so let's get started. In July, the City Council passed an ordinance that would restrict encampments. What is happening with that law?
That ordinance is 41.18, and I think it comes from a lot of frustration from a lot of Angelenos, voters throughout the city of LA, of all the major encampments, the trash that has built up throughout the city of LA. So just recently, we just finalized some of the last regulations of 41.18, and quite frankly, it's very simple, straightforward. You can't have an encampment in front of a school, a nursery, a daycare center, in front of a library. It's just that simple. But I want to be very clear because it's very important. When we talk about enforcement, it simply doesn't work if you don't have the housing. Because what we can't do, and I know some folks would like to, but you can't criminalize and jail individuals because they're poor, or because they have a drug addiction, or because of the color of their skin, or because they have a severe mental illness. That doesn't work. In fact, at the end of the day, it wastes tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayers. What we just did recently in the 90032, which is El Sereno neighborhood in City 14, is we had an encampment of over 100 individuals on the medium of Huntington Drive, which is on your way to Alhambra. It's in the farthest corner of Northeast LA. And what we did, my staff working with LASA and other community-based organizations, we did like a really intensive outreach. Didn't need the LAPD. We did a lot of outreach. We acquired 2 motels. We converted them quickly to home key hotels. And we went and we spoke with every single individual that was there. And we said, listen, we can give you a warm blanket. We can give you warm, clean towels. You can have your own little mini refrigerator, a television set. You can have your own remote control where you can watch the Dodgers or the Lakers. You know, you can have an HVAC system. So
you got them housed.
Got them housed. You can have, more importantly, a locked door for your own protection and safety. And we got the vast majority of them. In fact, 98, 99% of them said yes, unequivocally. So when you're going to do enforcement, you need housing. Without housing enforcement, we're just having a dog chase its tail, criminalizing folks, which we shouldn't be doing. In fact, we have a U.S. federal judge has said very clearly, you can't do it. So that's what 4118 is. Not in front of schools, daycare centers, nurseries, in front of the entrance of a library.
This issue is much bigger than just housing, though. We have mental illness as well as addiction. So how are we going to address those issues?
Well, let me say this. If LA is the epicenter of homelessness nationwide, then the district that I'm proud to represent, that I'm honored to represent, is in fact ground zero for homelessness. I have more unhoused individuals in the entire city of Los Angeles. In fact, I have more unhoused individuals than any other city in America except for New York City. Now, I didn't compare apples to apples. And to make this very clear for the viewers, I compared a city district with major metropolitan cities throughout the country. I have that many individuals. It's a humanitarian crisis unlike anything we've ever experienced before. Now, it's been largely contained in Skid Row, but it's become such a major issue throughout the city of LA because it's hemorrhaged through every corner, through every neighborhood in LA. And that's why when we deal with individuals who are experiencing homelessness, who are severely mentally ill, we really need the LA County Mental Health Department to really step up. Because what we don't have in the city of LA is we don't have a mental health department. We have LADWP, we have planning, building safety, recs and parks, we have LAPD as well as LA Fire Department, but we don't have the facilities. And quite frankly, the facilities, the mental health facilities for LA County are the city streets of Los Angeles. That's unacceptable. When you have someone who's running down the street half naked or naked altogether with feces caked onto their skin, screaming and yelling, having a psychotic breakdown, to me that's a humanitarian crisis. But unfortunately, government officials, it's white noise. It's part of the landscape, and it's become normalized. And we should be outraged. We shouldn't, just view it as that's just another day in the city of LA, because it leaves us with an indelible mark of shame. So we really need the county, LA County Mental Health Department to really step up, because the vast majority of unhoused individuals are there for economic reasons. They're not there for mental illnesses. But in Skid Row, it's especially acute. But let me say this, the longer you stay unhoused, the bigger the spiral is.
Yeah.
And then mental illnesses, I can't speak for you, but I'll speak for myself. I can't imagine if I lost everything in my identity, my values, my principles, and I'm out on the streets. And to numb my pain, you start using drugs because you don't have access to psychotherapeutic help, and then all of a sudden, I would start losing it. So that's why they need help now.
Yeah. You represent Skid Row, and a lot of the services are concentrated in that area. That is a big part of why there are so many homeless people there. I recently spent a day on Skid Row, and what I saw was extremely troubling. My photographer and I documented some of what we saw. Let's take a look.
Okay.
You need a place to stay tonight. I can get you into the mission today.
What mission?
The Union Rescue, they'll take women in, no questions asked.
Oh, no, I don't like the way it smells in there.
It's the start of Senior Lead Officer Dion Joseph's patrol around the LAPD Central Division and Skid Row.
This is me engaging in what's called high visibility patrol. And when I get to one of those hot spots, I'll park my car and I'll stay there and I'll get out and walk the area. And that's called the sit down technique. That's what I call the sit down, where I sit down on a block to kind of deter the crime, so the people that really need help, that want to come to me for help, they'll come. You can't be in the street like that, brother. You can't be in the street.
Scenes like this play out over and over as we ride along in his LAPD squad car. Skid Row covers a 50-block area in downtown LA. It's home to about 4,700 people on the streets and in shelters. That's according to the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority. What did you give?
I gave a hygiene kit to a woman who I believe needs some help.
Known on the streets as the Angel Cop, Officer Joseph hands out hygiene kits paid for by members of his church. 40% of the people on Skid Row are women, and Officer Joseph tells us 2/3 of them have been sexually assaulted at least twice.
Ma'am, please cover up.
We spot a woman walking down a busy street who's nude from the waist down.
This is a systemic failure that they've made us the tip of the spear for. And I've been calling and begging for more proactive outreach to people just like that. But under the law, she's not killing anybody. We can't help her.
There are more heartbreaking scenes just a few blocks away.
Why did you leave Compton?
I left Compton because I got gang raped
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that.
twice.
I'm really sorry to
So
hear
my
that.
friend brought me to San Pedro, then I moved to Siri Street, and then I got beat up on Siri Street.
Oh.
Domestic violence.
Oh, man.
Yep, with the guy that brought me here.
Where's he?
He's Pyru on San Pedro.
Did you make
He's
a
in
police report?
mission. No, because I don't tell.
Officer Joseph expresses frustration that this humanitarian crisis has spread to other parts of the city.
I know homeless in Venice Beach who used to be in Skid Row. And now Venice Beach is becoming so dangerous that some of those folks came back to Skid Row. So it's a never-ending cycle, you know? It's a never-ending cycle.
He blames a city council decision in 2020 barring enforcement of anti-camping laws during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Because of litigation and change in laws, a lot of these individuals, now they're allowed to camp, sit, sleep on the sidewalk. So now there's no incentive for them to get up and go into a program if I can sit down on the sidewalk and continue to destroy myself with crack cocaine, heroin, spice, methamphetamines, and other drugs, which also can lead many of them into mental illness. It's what we call dual diagnosis. I know individuals who came in here who didn't have mental illness, but then they started smoking meth, spice, and all these drugs, and over time became mentally ill, and now they're mentally ill and a drug addict, which is like a double whammy right there. You see that black smoke on the DWP building? That's a Skid Row eviction. That's a former Skid Row eviction where they burned somebody's tent because they didn't want them there, and they had to leave.
Is this a functioning DWP building?
Oh yeah, it functions. Yep, and they can barely get out of their doorways because of the tents.
I see a lot of black people.
Yes, that is the most heartbreaking thing for me as a black man. When I first came to Skid Row, you know, I heard of Skid Row, but I thought it was kind of a myth, you know, like it couldn't be that bad. I thought it was a bunch of poor guys shaking for change. I was wrong. When I got here at the time, 1997, about 80% of the people in this area looked just like me. And that was the most heartbreaking thing that I ever saw.
So what do you think of some of the things we just saw?
I think it's accurate 100%. It is outrageous, and that's why for me, for a lot of elected officials at every level of government, it's become white noise, or when they see it for the very first time, they're absolutely astonished, you know. But let's be real. This has been going on for years, if not decades, and the reason why it's the #1 issue in the city, in the region, in the state of California, is because it's hemorrhaged outside of the safety confines of Skid Row. Now we see encampments in almost every neighborhood. Historically, the hot spots for homelessness has been Skid Row, it's been the streets of Hollywood, and it's been Venice Beach. But now we see encampments in every neighborhood in the Valley, in Mid and West LA, in South LA especially, and in Boyle Heights. Well, historically, we've had neighborhoods that have had their struggles, but they've never had large, homeless encampments, that have bled from Caltrans properties adjacent to highways right into neighborhoods and into parks. So to me, it is the largest humanitarian crisis that this city is facing and has faced in a very, very long time. So to me, it's all hands on deck. God bless, Officer Dion. And the thing that strikes me the most about Officer Dion is he's not saying, I want to get out and send me to another station. He says, I want to be here because I want to continue to work here. And the frustrations that he shares openly are the ones that I share. I've only been here 9 months. I came into office
Exactly.
2 months before.
You've been here less than a year, and these problems do go back decades. So we definitely want to point that out.
Yeah, so I've been here 9 months, and from what I've seen, it's completely unacceptable. And that's why just last August, the council has approved my plan called A Way Home, which is 25,000 housing units by the year 2025, because ultimately, enforcement, issues of mental illnesses, sexual assaults, horrific that women of color, women, at the lowest economic strata, who have been marginalized or vulnerable on any given night in the city of LA. And this happens 24/7. So we should collectively be outraged. The good thing is it doesn't make a difference if you're a Democrat or Republican or points in between. Angelinos want immediate action, but we have to be very smart because we have spent tens of millions, hundreds of millions, and not billions of dollars, and the desired outcomes that we wish to have not really come to fruition. So there's been a lot of good work done by our mayor, by council members, and other good folks. We really have to double down, triple, quadruple down all of our efforts in a very strategic way to make sure we can house or unhoused community members.
Earlier, you mentioned the county mental health department, and it sounded to me like you were saying they're not doing enough. Is that what you were saying?
Listen, if you are experiencing severe mental illnesses, you shouldn't be left on the streets where you're at your most vulnerable. When you're experiencing homelessness, that means you're at the lowest point of your life. And if you have a dual diagnosis of schizophrenia and a severe drug addiction to crystal meth, for example, you need help. But if you're left out on the streets languishing, roasting under a hot, brutal sun, and especially if you're a woman and you're being sexually assaulted every single night and you're not willing to engage with law enforcement, then LA County has to intervene now and provide the physical surroundings that's conducive for the well-being and safety, and provide the psychotherapeutic services as well as the medication. Because the city of LA simply does not have a mental health department. And this is a gargantuan crisis, unlike anything we've ever seen before. Listen, I took my family members here last year, and we drove through Skid Row, and they were looking out the window in the van, and they were saying in Spanish, "No puede ser, increíble, increíble, la ciudad de Los Ángeles, this cannot be, this is incredible, it's the city of LA." One family member said, "Este lugar parece el tercer mundo, this place looks like the third world." Another family member actually corrected that other family member, rightfully so, and said, "Eso es un insulto." That is an insult to third world nations. Yeah, that's an insult to third world nations, because you may get systemic, deep entrenched poverty in developing nations, but when you compare the crisis in Skid Row to other developing nations, whether it be in Latin America, Asia, or Africa, or elsewhere, you don't see the degradation that we're experiencing, witnessing in my district. Be mindful about one thing right now. This is a district that I've inherited with the largest number of unhoused individuals, but I'm also proud to represent and honored to represent the human beings in Skid Row. I've spent a lot of time the last 9 months in Skid Row. There's some incredible human beings in Skid Row, salt of the earth, individuals who have blown my mind away of who they were at one time and who they've become. And that's why this is a tragic human story. But we need government to work for them, not against them.
Is there a role that the federal government could play to address this issue?
There's no question about it. I think the federal government, I think everyone is on the line when it comes to the issue of homelessness. You just can't have individuals at various levels of government sort of kind of pick their constituents. So our unhoused community members are constituents of members of Congress too. For example, the Section 8 voucher, the value has dropped considerably and hasn't been increased in decades. The members of Congress really have to step up, because if I'm a single mother with children and I have a Section 8 voucher, and for example, let's say it's valued at $2,500, but I need several bedrooms for my kids so they can have their own privacy, especially when they're entering, their teens. If they want to rent to me a 3-bedroom apartment and it's $3,800 a month, then that $2,500, voucher is not going to cut it for me. So what happens? They end up on the streets. They end up living, in garages. They end up living in their own cars. And that's when LA County Social Services come in and they take away the children. But that could have been prevented a long time ago if the Congress and our federal government really got their act together and worked in a cohesive manner. This is not the time for folks to be on the sidelines. This is time for folks to be on the front lines, and that means everyone's involved in this one.
Mm-hmm. As I said, this issue has been going on for decades. Do you think we've reached a turning point?
Well, I think that what LA has lacked has been a North Star, a plan to navigate, us to a higher point where we can see improvement. And like I said, just last month in August, the City Council has approved my Way Home Plan, 25,000 by 25. It is a navigation North Star. So you in the media, as well as others, can hold us accountable if we don't reach, our goal. But we can't do is we can't continue to sort of meander. You have to have a goal, a desired outcome, and we have to work backwards to meet our goals. And that means housing. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we have folks who have severe mental illnesses. We have folks who have drug addictions. We have folks who have a combination thereof. We have structural, entrenched, systemic racism that has really driven people of color, but especially in Skid Row, African Americans, into the deepest despair unimaginable. But ultimately, what you need is to put a roof over their heads, first and foremost, to stabilize and to stop the hemorrhaging. And that's what we have control over. That means the various city departments have to work together and synchronize their efforts, sort of kind of work hand in glove together so we can be efficient, whether it's adaptive reuse, purchasing old buildings and immediately converting them into housing, whether it is master leasing, meaning that, for example, if I can't get access to an apartment because my FICO score is horrific, I have no job, I have trouble getting my identification, no landlord is going to want me at all whatsoever. But if the city or a nonprofit entity can master lease because they have the resources to pay the rent, then I can go through that entity and we can quickly house individuals in many vacancies. Let me be mindful about one thing. The city of LA has 41,000 apartments, luxury market rate surplus. We have 41,000 individuals who are homeless in the city of LA. That's upside down. And we have to put our priorities straight in LA for all Angelinos, whether you live in Woodland Hills, Winnetka, Westchester, or Encino, or East LA, South LA, or Sherman Oaks. We're in this together.
What do your constituents say about homelessness in the district?
They feel it, they witness it, they experience it every single day, and they want action. They're tired. If anyone has experienced homelessness to its unimaginable levels, it is my neighbors, it's my friends, it's my loved ones, it's my constituents in City 14. Like I said a few moments ago, if LA is the epicenter for homelessness, then CD14 is ground zero, just like anybody else. Whether you came from the Deep South, fleeing Jim Crow laws, segregation, came to California for a better life, and you own your own house, and you're so proud of it. Whether you came from Central America or Mexico, seeking that golden dream, crossing 2, 3 borders, worked your fingers to the bone, and have your own house, they, like anybody else, they want the streets to be clean. They want them to be safe. And they want our unhoused friends, neighbors, and loved ones to have a roof over their head. And they want it to be done at a value point that doesn't overtax taxpayers. So that means us elected officials, we have to produce for them, to do everything we can to move heaven and earth, to provide the housing, to get folks off the street sooner rather than later. And that doesn't mean mission style, rescue mission, congregate shelters. That's what the woman didn't want to go there, because it's a large warehouse of folks. And God bless the folks there. They do a fantastic job. Be mindful. But a lot of folks, they want their own locked door.
Yeah. Like the tiny home villages.
Exactly.
And those are popping up around the city. Are there any coming to your district?
Well, I'll tell you what, by the end of this month, September, I'll have the largest tiny home village community in the United States of America, right off the 110 freeway, Arroyo Seco, in Highland Park. It is my response to immediately moving folks into shelter, non-congregate shelter. 60 square feet, you have a locked door, you have an HVAC system, you have your own bed, you have a light. If it gets too hot, guess what? You can put on the air conditioning. If it gets too cold, you can turn on the heater. They'll have bathrooms, they'll have showers, they'll have 3 meals served to them a day. You'll have 24/7 security. It's short term. It's not the panacea to the big structural issues, because when we're not dealing with macroeconomic issues out of Washington, D.C. that drive people into poverty, and all of a sudden members of the council, our mayor, Eric Garcetti, sort of kind of left holding the bag to deal with this crisis. That's why I say it's all hands on deck. But tiny shelters, I think, are for the immediate. I know some folks want the perfect. We can't let the perfect get in the way of the good, because we have 4 Angelinos who die on our streets every single day. In fact, just last year, you had 1,383 Angelinos who lost their lives on the streets of the city and county of Los Angeles. That's one too many.
Do you know how many units will be in the tiny home village?
We'll have about 100 units. That is 2 individuals per unit. There's 2 beds per unit. There'll be a total of over 200 individuals. Also, too, we're building tiny cabin shelter units on the corner, a little north of Colorado on Figueroa, up northeast for the Eagle Rock community, where we have a growing, unhoused community as well, too. Here in Skid Row, Little Tokyo, and elsewhere, we have the largest number, again, in the city of LA, and we're going to methodically go block by block. We're going to offer, the housing. We have to secure the housing first, because you can't criminalize them, and you cannot give them a citation, which the city of LA had done historically. But think about this, the logic. If I'm unhoused and I have no money, and you give me a ticket for being unhoused, how am I going to pay it?
Yeah.
And guess what? I don't have an address, so I don't end up going to court. And then all of a sudden there's a failure to appear, an FTA. And let's say an LAPD officer says, Anita, you didn't go to your court date, there's a failure to appear, I have to take you in. You're like, I have no money, so it becomes a circle, this litigation merry-go-round that's nonsensical. If we're going to have a huge impact on the livelihoods and the human condition of all individuals who are experiencing homelessness, we have to provide the housing that's necessary. Without it, we're just going around in circles.
Some of the things I saw, it's very different being there than seeing it on the news, than seeing the despair on the news. So I want to move on from homelessness, but just one last thing. What would you say to the people, the business owners down there? Because we met some business owners who were very frustrated.
Yeah. The business owners have every reason to be frustrated. You have individuals who are relieving themselves because there are no restrooms, because they're homeless. You have individuals who are sleeping on their doorsteps, and it's impacting their bottom line, especially during coronavirus, where so many businesses were eviscerated. So I feel their frustration, and I feel their anger as well, too. This becomes a win-win situation for small, medium, and big businesses as well as our unhoused community members, if we can be all hands on deck to provide the housing that's necessary, so then we alleviate the crisis that they're going through, and we alleviate the crisis that businesses have to go through. Businesses want action, and they want it now, and I agree with them, and that's what we're going to give them.
All right. You mentioned the pandemic. We are in the midst of the pandemic. What impact has it had on your district specifically?
That's a good question, and I appreciate that question very much so, because again, if LA was the epicenter, then my district, such as Boyle Heights, was ground zero for both infections and mortality rates. A lot of my constituents are salt of the earth. They are individuals, men and women, but especially single mothers, like my mother, a woman with a third-grade education, a single immigrant mother who worked her fingers to the bone. These are essential workers who, quite frankly, have been treated as if they're expendable workers. Multi-generations under one roof, very dense conditions. They're the ones who are fearing an eviction tsunami, that they themselves may be the new class of unhoused individuals living in parks in their own cars, couch surfing and relatives, in relatives' homes. My community was devastated, eviscerated, in many similar communities, whether it was in South LA, whether it was in Pacoima, or elsewhere throughout the city of LA, because quite frankly, the vaccination didn't get to us on time. The vaccination was not easily and readily available. And when it comes to shelter in place, it's very easy for someone who lives in a 3,000, 5,000 square foot home to isolate, to hibernate. My constituents live in very dense conditions. That's why I wish that the vaccination was, that they use the data that says these are the zip codes that are the hot spots where folks are dying and dropping like flies. We have to throw everything in the kitchen sink and then some to make sure that we inoculate them so they're safe, because others have the financial wherewithal and the luxury to isolate, to hibernate, to keep their distance well beyond 6 feet, because they have the financial wherewithal to withstand. It's always people at the lowest economic strata and people of color who will be most affected always when there's any type of calamity, whether it's climate change, whether it's pollution, whether it's health conditions, and that's why we have to put them first.
These essential workers, describe to me what type of work they do. Grocery store workers, what are we talking about?
Folks who are grocery workers working at our Vons, working at our Food for Less, our Trader Joe's, our Whole Foods, folks who work in factories and manufacturing plants, folks who were working in restaurants, the folks who are the busboys, the dishwashers, the cooks, the folks, quite frankly, who are the backbone economically of the city of LA. Without them, the city doesn't work. It doesn't function. That's why I really wish that we would have put them first as opposed to last.
There was a FEMA site in your district.
There was.
Did that make a difference?
It did make a difference. It did make a difference. On the campus of Cal State LA, I think President Joe Biden, along with Governor Gavin Newsom, we advocated for it. It did make a huge impact after doing a lot of outreach in the community, because quite frankly, and I'm sure you've heard these stories, we saw Range Rovers and we saw Teslas and Porsches and BMWs in communities that they've never seen them before. And not to say that folks may not have relatives who drive those cars, but quite frankly, in the Ramona Gardens projects in Boyle Heights, I saw a brand new Range Rover, and it wasn't anyone living in the community. So they figured out how to manipulate the system to get
people were coming
the
from
vaccination.
other areas. I saw that in South LA at Kedron Health. People were coming from other areas because the vaccine was available in those communities at the time.
May I
South LA,
say,
yeah,
that
East
is
LA.
a way to sort of to jump the line and get in front of the line. And what we saw during this pandemic also too was humanity and the lack thereof as well too, of folks doing everything they can, using their power, wealth, and privilege and entitlement to get in front of the line, to get inoculated and vaccinated, while those on the front lines were eviscerated.
Well, this has been a lively discussion. Would you
Thank
agree?
you. It's an honor to be here with you.
Thank
I hope to do it again.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Councilman Kevin de León.
Thank you so much.
And I am Anita Bennett, and thank you for watching LA Currents.